While the work from home movement has been fantastic for employees, there has been significant collateral damage to cities and municipalities, and that is what we are here to talk about today. When the COVID pandemic happened in the beginning of 2020, many white-collar workers began to work from home and did so throughout that year and into or through 2021, and that left damages to cities which rely on those employees to come into offices and sort of boost economic development within those areas. And as the world has begun to return to normal, many employers continue to offer remote or hybrid work options, which continue to keep these workers away from the city. And those effects have already been felt by cities. A research paper by the National Bureau of Economic Research found that a decline of 45% in office values happened in 2020. And those values will stay depressed by 39% in the long run. The latter represents a $453 billion value in destruction to those commercial real estate properties. The news is filled with stories about companies that are cutting back on office space or trying to get out of those leases. We saw Meta terminate about 450,000 square foot of office space in New York. Now, some of that could be due to the layoffs that are occurring at Meta throughout 2022 and 2023, but they continue to offer some hybrid work as well, meaning that they need less space there. Additionally, we see the story about Juul, the e-cigarette company, which bought a building for $400 million in 2019. And just this last October, they listed it for $174 million, a loss of over 50% on the value in just 3.5 years. Real estate values and office vacancies matter to cities because the more occupied your buildings are and the more valuable they are, that affects property taxes for the city, which can have a dramatic impact on their fiscal budgets. The National League of Cities estimated that property tax for 2022 revenue was down 4.3% for cities, which can have a pretty large effect. For example, take New York City. 1/3 of their tax revenue comes from property tax, and about 20% of that is office buildings alone. The declining market value of Manhattan offices has been estimated to cost the city $5.25 billion for 2022 alone. The problem for cities and loss of workers does not end with just property taxes, however. Emptier offices also mean less traffic in the city, which means less commerce in the city. Coffees, lunch orders, happy hours, all of those decline. And as a result, sales tax revenues will decline. Again, the National League of Cities estimated an average loss of 2.5% of sales tax revenue in 2022. Returning to our example of New York City, they estimated that remote work costs the city $111 million in sales tax receipts for 2022. The third main problem with the loss of workers is the lower traffic on city public transportation, less traffic on subways and buses. The mass transit ridership has recovered from COVID era lows, but has sort of stalled out at roughly 70% of pre-pandemic levels. This means less revenue going to those transit systems, which already operate on really tight budgets, which could threaten those services even further for them. These losses in revenue can result in something called an urban doom loop, which is kind of funny to me. It sounds like something a mad scientist would create in a lab. But the idea is that these trends can become self-fulfilling. Falling revenues turn into lower quality public services, less reliable transit, poor infrastructure, lower quality schools. And this renders the cities less attractive to your higher earners, who then depart for the suburbs, which thereby depress revenues even further. And then those underpopulated downtowns become less conducive to small businesses and more conducive to crime. As downtowns have less restaurants and services and higher criminal activity, the concern is that more firms will flee them, leading to underpopulated office space. If you're a mad scientist that appreciates a urban doom loop, give this video a like. It does help the channel out a lot. Now, to me, this is conjecture at this point. We have no real evidence that there is this mass decline in cities and mass fleeing of employers, at least not yet. There are plenty of companies that like to have their employees in the office and work in the city, and there are lots of benefits to those cities. I do think cities will need to adjust and to adapt to the new ways of working, and how that will exactly shake out, we don't know yet. Additionally, for now, cities have benefited from the America Rescue Plan Act and the Infrastructure Act. Both have provided a lot of relief funds and infrastructure grants to the cities, and that will sort of bolster their revenues to improve public services. I do see this going one of two ways. The first being that cities will push employers to bring their employees back to the office.
One thing that can't happen, you can't stay home in your pajamas all day. That is not who we are as a city.
Many employers receive tax incentives from major cities where they have office space located, and a lot of these incentives hinge on full-time jobs done primarily on site. At this point, because of the pandemic, the cities sort of relax those requirements, but it remains to be seen how aggressively they will enforce them now that the pandemic is largely over. It remains to be seen how effective this can be. If they push too hard on employers that want to keep a hybrid or remote option, they run the risk of chasing them away as they look for new office space, maybe in nearby competing municipalities, which will offer them a better deal. When looking at future economic incentives, they need to be designed with hybrid or remote work in mind, maybe offering incentives around leases or office improvements or real estate investment development within their cities. Lastly, I know some people might suggest converting some of this unoccupied office space into affordable housing in these cities. It's no secret that a lot of these cities are expensive places to live. That proposition is a lot harder than it sounds. Most of these office buildings are not designed to be housing. There is a lot less plumbing and electrical than what you would need for converting it into condos or apartment buildings. You are also going to have a lot less window space than you would in a appropriately built apartment building, and most would be deficient on the city's residential codes and zoning laws. So it wouldn't be impossible, just very expensive to do. Let me know in the comments below if you think cities are in trouble or if they will be able to adapt and bounce back. If you want to know more about why commercial real estate is a problem in the greater economy, check out the video on the screen now. Thanks for watching.